All right, let's jump right in. Picture this. War breaks out in the Middle East. And just like that, in a matter of days, the entire global economy is on the brink. Why? Because the world's most critical choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, just got slammed shut. So today, we're going to break down exactly how something like this could happen, and, maybe more importantly, how the world could possibly fight back.
And the stakes here, they are just massive. We're talking about 20%. That's 1/5 of the entire planet's daily oil supply. Not to mention a huge chunk of its liquefied natural gas. All of it suddenly trapped inside the Persian Gulf. This isn't just some regional squabble, you know? This is a shockwave that's going to hit every single gas pump, every factory, all across the globe.
And what's crazy is just how fast this all goes down. Look at this timeline. In just 2 weeks, we go from the first airstrikes to a total collapse of shipping. Oil prices, they're skyrocketing past $100 a barrel, and you've got over 300 massive tankers just stuck. A giant floating traffic jam with absolutely nowhere to go. It's chaos for the global supply chain.
Now, that's a really interesting phrase on this slide, functional closure. This isn't about a big line of warships blockading the strait like in the old days. No, this is something way more subtle, and in a lot of ways, a lot more effective.
So, this is the million-dollar question, right? How on earth could a country pull this off with just a handful of cheap, expendable drones, especially when its actual navy has been pretty much wiped out? Well, the answer reveals a whole new type of modern warfare.
And here's the genius of it, really. It's called an insurance blockade. See, Iran doesn't have to sink every ship. All they have to do is create enough fear, just a few random drone strikes here and there, that the big insurance companies get spooked and pull out. And if there's no war risk insurance, well, no shipping company on Earth is going to risk a billion-dollar tanker and its crew. So, no insurance, no sailing. Simple as that. The strait is effectively closed, and they barely had to fire a shot.
And this just nails the core of the problem. You can't just send in some minesweepers and call it a day. The real issue isn't a physical one, it's psychological. The real battle is to restore confidence in the entire global shipping and insurance market.
So, if brute force is off the table, what do? How do you solve a confidence problem? Well, the answer isn't some single silver bullet. It's actually a really sophisticated, multi-layered strategy that's designed to untangle this knot from every direction at once. And here it is, the counter strategy, an integrated 5-point plan. And the key word there is integrated. Each one of these steps supports the others. You can't just pick one off the menu. It's the whole package, a synchronized campaign hitting the problem from every angle at once. Let's break them down, starting with attrition. First up, you have the military foundation attrition. Now, the goal here isn't to eliminate every single threat out there. That's pretty much impossible. The real goal is to beat back the drone and fast boat attacks to a point where insurers can look at the situation and say, okay, the risk is manageable again. We can start writing policies. It's kind of like how the Allies managed the U-boat threat in World War II. They didn't sink every last one, but they made the waters safe enough to operate. Okay, now for a really fascinating piece of strategy. You see, the Iranian coast along the Gulf isn't actually ethnically Persian. It's home to millions of Avazi Arabs. By supporting a local insurgency there, you force Iran's Revolutionary Guard into a tough choice. Do they keep all their focus on shutting down the strait, or do they have to deal with a serious uprising in their own oil-producing backyard? The thing is, they can't do both effectively at the same time. All right, step 3. We bring back the idea of convoys, but, with a 21st century twist. Back in the 80s, the U.S. Navy had to escort ships the entire 500-mile length of the Gulf. Today, with a smaller fleet, the strategy has to be smarter. Instead of that long haul, you create this heavily defended 40-mile sprint corridor just through the most dangerous part of the strait itself. It's a way to get way more ships through safely, but with a lot fewer resources. Of course, at the same time, you've got to relieve that immediate economic pressure, and that's where bypass pipelines come into play. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have these pipes that literally go around the strait. But just look at that gap. They can move about 5.5 million barrels a day, which, don't get me wrong, is a lot, but it's still just a fraction of the 20 million that normally flows right through Hormuz.
And that's really the key takeaway here. These pipelines, a bit like the famous Berlin airlift, they don't replace the main route. But what they do is buy precious time. They act as this crucial buffer, calming the economic panic and giving all the other parts of this 5-point plan the time they need to actually work.
And to really shore up that buffer, you see a massive global response. The International Energy Agency coordinates the largest ever release of emergency oil reserves. We're talking a staggering 400 million barrels, just to stabilize the market and stop a complete economic meltdown. This is a huge international policy lever being pulled.
And that brings us to the last and maybe the most powerful piece of this whole puzzle. It's the ultimate judo move. The very act of closing the Strait of Hormuz, well, it inflicts devastating economic pain on Iran itself. And this is why it's so incredibly effective. Think about it. When Iran blockades Hormuz, they're also blockading themselves. They can't import almost a third of their own gasoline. They can't get nearly 40% of their wheat. All the food, the medicine, the industrial parts, gone. Their main port, Bandar Abbas, which handles 85% of their container traffic, is basically useless. They've literally created a self-inflicted economic disaster.
You know, the great naval strategist Alfred Thayer Mahan summed up this idea perfectly over 100 years ago. When both sides are getting hurt economically, the winner is simply the one who can take the pain the longest. The whole point is to make the blockade so unbelievably painful for Iran that their own regime just can't sustain it anymore.
And that is how it all weaves together. The military pressure, the internal diversion, the protected convoys, the economic relief from the bypass, and that crushing, self-inflicted economic pain. No single one of these works alone, but when you put them all together, they create this web of compounding pressures that the blockade just can't stand up against. So, the real insight here, the big takeaway, is this. The best strategy isn't about some heroic, head-on assault to storm the gate. It's about a much smarter, more indirect approach. It's about making the whole idea of the blockade totally futile, irrelevant, and, in the end, way more damaging to the one doing the blockading than to anyone else.
You know, this whole scenario leaves us with a really big question for the world we live in today. In the 21st century, is a nation's economy its greatest weapon, but also its greatest vulnerability? Because, as we've just seen, the lines between military power, economic power, and even psychological warfare, well, they're getting blurrier every day. And it really makes you wonder if the very thing that makes a country strong might just be its biggest weakness too.